Hello. Welcome to Backstory with Joan Goldstein. I'm Joan Goldstein. My guest today is a man named Ronald DeLapo, and he is the Princeton Bureau of Housing Inspector and Fire Housing Inspector and Fire Safety Community Risk Reduction Specialist. How more important could that be when it comes to fires? Ron, what do you want to share with us?
Hello, Joan. I would like to share home fire safety tips for people so that they would know what to do if they actually had a fire in their home and give them some information that will help them. And so when most of us are in our houses, we're not thinking about fires. We're thinking about our normal activities that we would do at home. And so but if there was a fire emergency to occur, how many people would actually realize and know what to do? You would wind up trying to just take care of things as you normally would, but then you'd have this emergency coming in. One thing that people don't really understand sometimes, if you haven't had experience with fire, is how fast fire can grow. And so I have something that I want to share with the audience on fire and what happens so that you have an idea of kind of how things play out. And so the time versus product of combustion slide that you see here in front of us gives a nice representation. It's a generalization, but it gives you an idea of how fast fire can grow and what can happen. And so looking from left to right on the screen, from the first activation and incident that happens, you have the fire ignition. And so fire starts out sometimes very slow and it may smolder and it create a lot of smoke. And then as it opens into open flame combustion, it actually grows very fast. And so a fire that has flames can double its size at least every 2 minutes. And so that can be very devastating. And so when you're sleeping in your home, and maybe you're not aware that there's a fire starting, by the time an alarm would sound, you really don't have much time to evacuate. So when you look at this chart, it's giving you a general representation. On the bottom, it has time in minutes. And so you can see it takes roughly a minute or so for the fire to be detected by a smoke alarm. And so the smoke alarm sounds, it makes the noise in the home, and then whoever is in the home, if you're able, you should call for the fire department by using 911. And so when you talk to someone on 911, the operator there will give you some information to help you. But also what will happen is you're going to be able to summon the fire department to come to your home. And so you want to be able to evacuate. The best thing before calling 911 is actually to evacuate your home if you could. And that's the safest way to do this. And I'll talk a little bit in a bit about what to do if you are not able to evacuate. But I want to show on the chart, you can see the fire is detected, you would report the fire, then the fire department is dispatched, and then they respond to the fire. And so it may take 5 to 7 minutes or more for the fire truck to actually arrive. And most of the time, it probably is more than 5 to 7 minutes. But during that time frame, if there's a fire in the home where there's actually flames, that fire can grow so fast where it can actually fill up a whole room and make it very difficult or almost impossible to escape. And so this slide also shows the benefits of having a home fire sprinkler system, which is actually very beneficial, but we're not going to talk much about that at this point, other than knowing that it's something that would be beneficial if you had a newer home to build and put the fire sprinkler in. It definitely has a benefit, but working smoke alarms is really the most and easiest important thing that we could all do and have in our home. You can take the slide down now, please. Thank you. And so when you have the fire growing in your home or in an area and you want to evacuate, several things are happening. The fire is making smoke, which has a lot of poisonous gases in it. The smoke is something that typically is what's going to hurt and can kill people. And so that is usually what winds up happening. If you have a fire in the home and you don't evacuate in time, the smoke can actually overcome you and make it so you would not be able to evacuate. One of the things that you would want to really understand is that we're thinking about being in our home, we're living our lives, and not thinking about where's my different ways out. When you go into your home, think about things. You normally would go in the same way and go out the same way almost every day. And so we're creatures of habit. And so we go in, we do what we need to do. In an emergency situation, it's good to know a few ways out of each area of the home. And so you may have 2 doors in your house that you can actually use, one instead of the other, in case your evacuation route is blocked. You can also have a window if you need it to evacuate. But when you're on higher levels of your home, a window could be somewhat challenging. And so a window typically on a single-story home is not that high from the ground. If you're on a second floor or a third level floor, now you're looking at a substantial drop to the ground if you had to use a window. And so thinking about different ways out are definitely important. Can you please put the sample fire evacuation plan on the slide, please? And so on the fire evacuation plan, thinking about different things, this is an example of a 1-story type layout. And so, but you see there's a bunch of different arrows there, and it's giving you different ideas of where to evacuate the different spaces from the home so that you can get outside. The idea is if there's a fire in your home, you do want to go outside and you don't want to go back into the home. The smoke, again, is what's going to hurt us and can kill us. Typically, once you're out of the house, you don't want to go back in because the smoke will overcome you. Even if you evacuate quickly enough and you think that you have time to go back in to get something else, no matter what it might be, don't do it. Because once you're outside the house, when you go back in, the conditions can change very, very quickly. The smoke can overcome you. And then as fire is actually growing, it grows to the point where it can fill a whole space up in a room. And you don't want to be in the home if it does that. On this diagram, you see there's a meeting place outside. That's very important for all of us. If you have children at home or you have older adults that maybe need some help getting out of the house, having them be aware of an escape plan or at least several different ways out of the house, maybe that they wouldn't normally use, would be very helpful in an event of a fire emergency. And so having a meeting place outside, somewhere that's a permanent place that you can locate and go to when everyone is out, that is actually a very good thing because it will allow you to go out to that meeting place, especially if you cannot all evacuate together. As a parent, most of us, our instincts would be to go to our children and to try to take them out of the house safely at all costs. And so, Lord willing, that would be the scenario if it ever happened. But if you can't do that by teaching your children, or if you have an older adult in the house that maybe you can't get to by giving them the opportunity to know where to go and what to do, they can meet you at the meeting place. When the fire department arrives, the first thing that the fire department will do is make sure that everyone is out of the house. If they are not, and there's an actual fire there, they're going to go into the home, into that adverse condition, and they're going to try to take whoever is in and get them out as safely. And so that's something that's very important by having a meeting place outside and knowing different ways to get out of your home other than the way that you would normally go in and out of the house. And so if you have situations where you're maybe on a second or third floor, they do have different things that you could do to help the fire department if for some reason you could not evacuate because the smoke is too heavy, you can't breathe through it. When you are evacuating a home and you have to go through smoke, the best thing to do is get lower to the ground. And so if you're able to get as close as you can to the ground, you're almost crawling almost at this point, and trying not to breathe in the smoke because the smoke is bad for us. The smoke will rise because of the heat, and with the fresher air that we can breathe easier would be lower to the floor. And so, but you want to get out as quickly as possible and go outside to your meeting place. And once you're out, you don't want to go back inside. And so that's something that's very important to realize. Now, with having different levels of the home, if there's a situation where you would not be able to evacuate, you can do things that will help you to survive a fire. By closing the door in a room that you would be in is the first important thing. When you're sleeping and you're home at night, one of the things that you can do to help, if you're thinking about this, would be to close your bedroom door. And that way, if there were a fire incident and there was smoke from the fire, it would not get into your room. That can help with your survival and to be able to be evacuated by the fire department if you couldn't get out the way that you would normally go, either down a flight of steps or outside the house. If you are inside of a room and you couldn't evacuate, by calling 911 from inside the home, you would talk to a dispatcher, the public safety communicator, who would actually give you information which can help you to survive the fire. They would also be able to take the information that they're getting from you and relay that to the fire department so that when they're responding to the call to help you, that they'll know exactly where to look for you in the home. And so that's very important to do. If you're not able to evacuate, if you're able to call 911 from inside the home by staying in a room with the door closed, that would be very helpful to try to keep you safe, as long as the fire and smoke was not in the room that you're currently in. You don't want to be in the room where the smoke and fire is. You want to be in another area of the house that's not being affected by them. So another thing you may be able to do if you're inside the home and you wouldn't be able to evacuate would be to go to a room that has a window. You have the door closed in the house, but if the window is able to be opened and you're able to either evacuate through that window, that may be an option, but you have to plan that out ahead of time before you would have a fire emergency. Another thing you might be able to do if you had a window would be to hang something out of it, like a sheet or a towel. And that way it would catch the fire department's attention when they did arrive, knowing that someone may be in that room. And so one caution that you do have to take, though, when you are opening up windows in a house that has a fire, is that if the fire is on a lower level of the house, you don't want to open the window if there is actually fire in the room below you, that the fire may be able to come out the window and up the house into your window. And so you have to be aware of those things. You may be able to even throw something out of the window if you couldn't hang a sheet or a towel out of it. So that way there would be something that would be oddly noticed outside of the house by the fire department. When the fire department arrives, typically we would do is walk around the entire building. And so we're looking for anything on the outside of the building that might indicate that there's someone inside that needs our help. And so by having people at a meeting place, knowing how many people were in the home to give us information, it just helps us to help everyone at the fire scene. And so that's some information regarding the evacuation planning and what you could do if you were inside the building. You can take this slide down, please. Thank you. And so the other thing that really is very important to have in a home for fires is to have working smoke alarms. And they also, you would need to have working carbon monoxide alarms. And so they both work together, but differently. And I'll explain a little bit about both of those as we continue our talk. Smoke alarms are probably the most important thing that we would want in our homes, and we want to make sure that they're working. They're the things that we never really pay attention to, but in the emergency situation of a fire, you want them to work because you want them to alert you. I had mentioned earlier that during the fire, if you're in the home, the smoke alarms are going to sound within a minute or so of the fire actually creating smoke that would activate the detectors. So there are different types of smoke alarms that are in the home. And so the most common may be an ionization alarm, which would sense a faster growing fire. And so this type of smoke alarm will sound very quickly with very little smoke. Many people have experienced having false activations of smoke alarms, maybe during normal cooking. And so if you're in the kitchen and you're not burning anything, you may not even see much smoke, if any at all, but you may have a smoke alarm that's close to the kitchen sound an alarm because of just normal cooking. And so that smoke from cooking is an example of a faster growing fire. And so also steam from your shower may activate an alarm, an ionization type of an alarm. And those, again, mimics more of a faster growing smoke. And so having the alarms with different types is beneficial, but they still are going to help you in the event of a fire. Another type of a smoke alarm is photoelectric alarm. A photoelectric alarm would be sensing a smoldering, a slower growing fire. And so by having a mix of the ionization smoke alarms and the photoelectric smoke alarms, it's actually good to have those both in your home. And so putting photoelectric alarms in areas where kitchens are located or bathrooms might be located would be better, because you would have less chance of false activations because of cooking smoke or steam. But they would still give you warning if you had a fire in the home. Now, fire in the house and when you're sleeping is very, very dangerous, even more so because your nose will not sense the smell of smoke while you're sleeping. And so the only way that you would be able to be woken up is by an alarm. And so the smoke alarms are very, very important. And so they do make smoke alarms that are for people who maybe are hearing impaired, that they sound different alarm signals, strobe lights. They may have a bed shaker that can be attached to the alarm sensor that if you're hearing impaired, it may be able to wake you up. So if you have an older adult that is not able to hear well, that's one way of alerting them. But ultimately, someone in the home hopefully will wake to the alarm to alert everyone so that you can evacuate. Another thing to consider with smoke alarms, children sometimes don't react to the sound of smoke alarms. So as a parent or caregiver, you want to be aware of that if you do have something, especially in the evening, when everyone is sleeping, that you try to go and make sure that everyone is out of the house and goes outside to the meeting place, and then call the fire department from that meeting place if possible. And so I do have something that I want to share with everyone. The smoke alarms have different sounds to them. The smoke alarm that I have here in front of me is a combination smoke alarm, and it sounds a beeping sound for the smoke alarm, and it also sounds a beeping sound for the carbon monoxide alarm. Those beeping tones are universal for the alarms that are sold typically here in the United States. And so they'll do that. This alarm actually has a voice activation, which explains what the beeping tones are, which is extremely beneficial because you'll be able to tell, especially in the middle of the evening, if you're confused about what's going on, just waking up out of a sound sleep, of what these alarms are. But smoke alarms come in different methods as well. This alarm here has a battery that would need to be replaced every at least 6 months to a year at a minimum. And so by replacing the batteries in the alarm, it makes sure that they're going to be working. If you have alarms that are connected to your home's AC power, those alarms, the main power comes from the electricity from the house, but they also have backup batteries in case the power were to fail. And so you do want to make sure if you have smoke alarms that have batteries that can be replaced, that you replace them at least every 6 months, at least once a year, to make sure that they don't run out of their backup power. And so if you don't replace that, you'll notice in the middle of the evening, typically when the house is quiet, you're going to hear the low battery chirping sounds. And so then you'll have to address it at that time. The smoke alarms these days also have an internal battery that has a 10-year power source. And so with a 10-year sealed lithium battery smoke alarm, whether it's battery operated powered only, or if it's hooked into your home's AC power, it'll give you that extra backup security without having to worry about replacing the backup battery. But before you install those alarms, you want to make sure you know what type you have. I'm going to sound this alarm so that everyone can hear the sounds of the smoke alarm, so you have an idea of what they are. Every home may have different style of smoke alarms, and it may have different type of communication devices that you're going to have. And we're going to talk a little bit more about smoke alarms after we listen to what they actually sound like. And that's the testing button.
monoxide.
So this smoke alarm sounded two different alarms. It sounded a carbon monoxide alarm with three beeps that were intermittent, and then it had a voice activation. Some alarms will give you the voice activation, and it also sounded the smoke alarm, which sounds continuously. And so that's the difference between the two sounds. But the tones and the way that they sound their signals are typically universal. And so can you put the slide of the smoke alarm placements in the home, please? So the smoke alarm placement in the home actually will be based on the manufacturer's recommendations, which typically you're going to have them at the bottom of stair landings on the ceilings. When the smoke alarms are installed, they should be installed higher up because smoke rises. And so you want the earliest activation. In homes that were built before 1977, the homes typically would have battery-powered smoke alarms only. And so these smoke alarms would be typically located at the bottom of stair landings so that if there were a fire on the lower level, as the smoke rose and went up the stairs, which would act like a chimney effect, it would create a path for the smoke alarms to pick up the smoke as it was going past, to give an earlier warning to anyone who might be up on the upper floors, so that you would know there was something going on so that you could evacuate. With having interconnected alarms in homes that typically were built after 1980s into the 1990s, regulations and fire codes changed. And that was because they found that as technology improved, they wanted to give people the earlier warning and the ways to be able to evacuate your home if there was a fire. And so by having the smoke alarms interconnected, it's going to allow you to have the earlier warning. And so if you had a fire on the lower level of your home, if you're sleeping on the upper floors, when the fire is detected on a lower level, it's going to allow you to be alerted on the upper levels. And so if you have something happening at nighttime, it's going to save you those valuable minutes so that you can be alerted, so that you can evacuate and be able to get out of your home. So knowing the evacuation routes that we had talked about earlier and having an escape plan of some sort, that's definitely beneficial in a fire emergency. And so having working smoke alarms is essential because that's what's going to alert you, especially when you're sleeping. When you're awake in your home, chances are very good that if something starts to burn, you're going to have the odor of smoke in the home, and you're going to notice that. You probably look for that before you actually had the alarms even sound. But when you're sleeping, it's very important. So the smoke alarms in newer homes would be interconnected, and they would be on each level of the home and in the bedrooms. As technology has changed, they actually have a wirelessly interconnected smoke alarm where you don't need the wiring that typically would be connected in the homes. And with the 10-year sealed lithium battery power source smoke alarms, you can put smoke alarms in an older home in the same configuration that is required for newer homes for the safety of anyone who's living in the house. So you have earlier warning. Another thing we talked about with the alarm that we just heard was carbon monoxide alarms. With carbon monoxide, it's something that you don't see and you don't taste. You don't know it's there. And so carbon monoxide is one of the deadly gases that is in the smoke from a fire, but that's something that's more common in a home. It's caused by incomplete combustion of gas or fuel burning appliances. So if you have a gas stove or a furnace or an oil burner, something of that nature, having them serviced and knowing that they're working properly is important. But having the carbon monoxide alarms in your home is extremely important as well, because during the day hours or evening hours, you would not know that there would be carbon monoxide in your home. So if you're cooking on the stove and you had a malfunction, or if you have a gas fireplace or even a wood burning fireplace, and it's not venting properly and the carbon monoxide is entering into your home, the only way that you would really know that there was an emergency is by having carbon monoxide alarms in the home. The best place to put the carbon monoxide alarms typically would be by your bedroom area so that when you're sleeping, you'll be alerted, just like the smoke alarms. It's also a good idea to have them on each level of the house, especially in the area where you have your fuel burning appliances. So if you have a fireplace, you would want to put it someplace in the area where the fireplace was, or if you have a basement level with a furnace or a water heater, those areas would be good locations. On all of the devices that we spoke about, carbon monoxide alarms and the fire smoke alarms, they have instructions on the best placement based on the design of those units that we would have. So they're very important to have, and those would help save your life if there were a fire incident or a carbon monoxide incident in your home. In this diagram that we have, it also has some other safety devices on there, and it talks about escape ladders. We talked about having a bedroom on a second or third floor. If you are in those areas of your home, having a second exit being a window, an escape ladder is definitely something that's very helpful and that can be used to help save you from a fire if that's an exit that you had to use. It also mentions on this about fire extinguishers. Having a fire extinguisher in your home is also very helpful, but knowing how to use it and when to use it is key. And so a fire extinguisher is only meant for small fires that you're basically witnessing and you could extinguish. You need to know how to use the fire extinguisher first before you would use that. And that's another topic that we could talk about at another time, possibly. But the fire extinguisher is not meant for you to use to fight your way out of the house with the fire. It's meant to only put out a small fire that you would be witnessing. And so having a knowledge of your home's layout, knowing how you would get in and out of your home, typically in a non-emergent and especially in an emergency, is very important. Making sure that you have working smoke alarms and working carbon monoxide alarms is key to anyone's safety within your home.
You know, Ron, there's just so much knowledge that most people don't have, and they don't learn. Where would they learn it? You see, where are they going to learn all these really life-saving methods and activities unless they talk to Ron DeLapo? And because there's nowhere that you learn this. I mean, I could tell you once I was in a fire when I was teaching in Manhattan in a college, and we heard the alarm going off, and one of my students opened the door and said, Professor, there's smoke in the hallway and the students are running out of the rooms. So we quickly ran out of the rooms and we tried to get out of the building, but they only had escalators. We didn't know if there was a stairwell anywhere, but they only had escalators. All the escalators were filled. We were forced to stand there and wait until there was an empty escalator to get on, to get out the building. It was very, very stressful, very tense. Then we stood outside. This was at night, an evening course I was teaching. And finally, the fire department came. And then later they said, you could go back in the building. I didn't want to go back in the building. My students didn't want to go back in the building. It is very stressful. And the truth is that this is, life-saving, preserving life. And yet, where do we get this education? Where do we learn these important things that you've been sharing with us today? And apparently, we learned them from Ron DeLapo. And Ron, you can come back another time. We could talk about some more events and some more problems that we need to know about. And thank you so much, Ron DeLapo, for coming to Backstory with Joan Goldstein today. Goodbye.
Thank you.